Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast was created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. Today I have the lovely pleasure of having Miss Tracy, and I'm going to butcher your last name. I apologize. Oeser?
Oeser.
Oeser. Oh, I was close. Kudo points to me. Anyway.
Happens all the time.
I bet it does. I'm notoriously great for butchering someone's name, so I apologize in advance to anyone and everyone. But I have the lovely pleasure of having Tracy Oeser, right? Did I get it?
Yep.
On today to chat about her grief, her story, and to just get to know her a little bit more. So go ahead, hit the like buttons, the subscribe buttons, share this with anyone you think might benefit from it. So welcome, Tracy. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Faith. I'm excited to get on here and chat with your audience.
Yeah, so this podcast is all about grief. And so tell me a little bit about yours. What's been happening in your world?
My world was pretty normal up till 2006. I was a single mom, had two teenagers, which that's its own kind of crazy. And 2006, my daughter died by suicide.
Oh, wow.
And that just, turned my world upside down. And so I've been on a grief journey, ever since. We just hit 17 years this past December.
Yeah.
And so, it's been a lot. Some good things, some bad things. I've learned a lot about myself, along the way. And I've championed through helping other people, down their grief journey.
Oh my gosh. So a single mother and you lose your only child to suicide.
I had two children. So I had my
Two children.
son was about
Okay.
14 months older, than she was.
Okay.
But, regardless, I mean, it
Yeah, no,
turns your world upside down and,
Yes.
So, it's figuring out, what to do and where to go and what it all means and why and all the questions of why me and now what and all the stuff.
Yeah. So I realized that those questions were actually PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, as I just learned these things about myself, like a month or so ago, you see those posts going around that are like, I was XYZ old, today's age when I found out. So I didn't, what was the support? Like, how did you, because suicide is a whole other beast.
Right.
That is a whole other beast. And had she been like suicidal before? Had she been depressed before? Like anything like that?
Well, she was a very outgoing, kind of a wild spirit, I like to say. I mean, she was the one that was, going to school and sitting in the back of the class doing makeup lessons with her friends in the middle of math class and, it's just stuff like that. And so and she was kind of quirky already. So some of the stuff, we would just kind of, poo-poo and go, yeah, that's her. But that last year of her life, she started withdrawing. She was a junior in high school. She'd started withdrawing. She started skipping class. She started not eating. We were having an issue with she lost probably 20 pounds and she wasn't that big to begin with.
Right.
So I think she got down to like 114 pounds and she was 5'4". So, as a mom, I was getting concerned that something was going on, and we'd ask and, she wouldn't share, I'm fine. It's all good. And so, she was struggling in school and just, this whole big juggernaut of things, right? Um, and so probably 6 months before she died, she made an attempt,
Mm.
and that certainly like stopped me in
Oh,
my
sure.
tracks. And
All
well,
hands
we
on
got to
deck
figure
at
this
that
out.
point.
All hands on deck. We got to figure this one out.
Mm-hmm.
So, I reached out to our local mental health community, trying to understand why and what
Yeah.
causes this and what should I do and what's her support need to look like and all the right things, right? But it didn't get better. And so 6 months later, she took her life. And so
Mm.
I struggled with a lot of guilt,
Yeah.
obviously after that of,
Sure.
okay, what did I miss? What didn't I do? What should I have said?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, who did I not reach out to that I should have? All of
Right.
that. And I had people say, you did all the right things. You called
Yeah.
the people you should have and tried to get support. And yeah, I work with a lot of parents who, they're in the same boat of this was my child, this is my responsibility.
Yeah.
It's my responsibility to get them to adulthood. And this happened, how is this my fault? I say you can't control what someone else is thinking, plain and simple.
No. Even
And I
your
mean, I've
children, you can't control
yeah,
them.
yeah. I mean, no matter how well we taught them the do's and don'ts and the rules and
Yeah.
all of that growing up, at the end of the day, I mean, we send them out into the world to do what they're going to do. And, I tell other parents, if they're going to skip school that day and go to the mall, they don't tell you before they go to
No.
school, you know. So this really isn't that much different, they don't tell you this is what I'm going to do tonight when I get home.
No.
Um, because they're already in pain and they're children, they can't rationalize and work it all out in their mind anyway. And if they're already struggling with something, that's another added layer to ugly. So
Yeah.
as far as my support system, it's very interesting in the world of suicide loss because people that you think, are your friends, they disappear.
Right.
Um, I gained a few friends that or support systems
Mm-hmm.
that were just acquaintances, and some of those, became my best advocates and shoulders to cry on and whatnot.
Sure.
Um, so I mean, even family, I had family, I had extended family, I had her dad's family, um, all say, well, I wasn't, I didn't adequately protect her. And so, when you have people that are in your face, basically saying you should have done more, well, you're going to think I should have done more. And so,
Absolutely.
experts come at you and say, well, you did everything you could. It falls on deaf ears for a while until you can sit down and unpack it, over time, obviously, and try to get it worked out. But it's an ugly journey because, like you said, suicide loss is just it's different, it's stigmatized.
I was gonna ask you, like, if the community like stigmatized you because of the suicide loss, because of, her taking her own life.
Well,
Like,
I mean, I took them disappearing, as a form of reacting to the stigma of
right.
suicide. In fact, my best friend that I've had since kindergarten, it wasn't until probably, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago that we were having a girls' weekend. And out of the blue, she just apologized to me. Or, I mean, she wasn't the ones that like totally bailed, but she didn't talk about my daughter that often. And so
Right.
she apologized to me. She says, I'm really sorry that I wasn't a better support system for you, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want
I think
to
that's a big
upset
thing.
you. Yeah, and I like I tell her and everybody that I talk to, you're not bringing up something that I'm not already thinking about
Right.
24/7. So I appreciate that you're, taking the thought, right, to preserve my feelings and not make me cry, but I guarantee you I can do enough crying all by myself
Yeah.
without your help.
Right.
So once I turned that around and said, I don't hold any ill will and I get it, then the whole dynamic changed. But, I mean, as just people, we don't like to put ourselves in ugly situations,
I
so
think a
to go
lot
up
of
to somebody
times
and say, tell me about your loss and what did that feel like? And no, people don't
that
like
would
to
be
do that. They like to
very
run. Right.
awkward.
Right. Unless you're paying them like $150 an
Right,
hour or something,
right,
then they want to know. But
right.
yeah, I mean, people don't generally want to just jump right into that. Tell me all your stuff, right? So yeah, but
Unless you're
initially
me. I'm just like asking all
yeah,
the time.
it's okay. But yeah, I mean, it's just different. It's, I can never, even after all this time, I don't think I can ever effectively explain it, as to how different it is as opposed to a death by some other means or a death
Well,
of
sure.
an elderly person or, because it's just ugly. It's ugly.
Well, I think suicide is because you want an answer as to why. Like why? Why did this what led up to this? What are the things that I didn't see? What are, and you just blame yourself because you think you could have prevented it somehow, some way.
Well, and I've done some blog posts, where I've said when we give birth to these kids, right, there's like this unwritten, rule book of you will raise this child up, like I said, to go out into the world and be a productive citizen and all of that. Therefore, if that doesn't happen for whatever reason, we're at fault. And
Correct.
there's so much, blame and self-blame and all of that, that it muddies up the grief and recovery process.
It sure does. I agree with that 150 billion%. Because I know when we lost our daughter, like the guilt, like I should have saw it coming, I should have done this or should have done that or whatever. And she just died by a freak vehicle accident. And it's like, okay, well, what could we have done differently? Could we have just like kept her home, wrapped her in bubble wrap, like what could we have done differently? And
Right.
the truth of the matter is she was 19 years old. Had just moved away from home. There was nothing that we could have done any differently than what we had been doing because she was starting
Right.
her life. Like there was
Normal.
nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so and I think that makes it hard too on itself because like, why couldn't I have done nothing? Like blah, 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 and then you
Right.
just go off and you find something else to nitpick about yourself for. And, if that one is resolved, then you just find another one, until you break out of that cycle,
Hmm.
until you
Yeah.
just break that curse and say, you know what? I did everything that I could do. I reached out to all the people that I needed to reach out to or could have reached out to. And because I know our neighbor here, he had just committed suicide last fall and he was in his 50s. And the family members have said that the community around them has, like, they don't talk to them anymore. Like some of them, not all of them.
Right.
But because he committed suicide, it's almost like they don't want to be near that person for fear that it might rub off or whatever the case may be.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of people also don't know how to talk to people that have lost a child, people that have lost a significant other, people that have lost someone so pertinent in their life. They have no idea.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it is them stepping back because one, they can't handle it. Two, they have no idea what to say or do or whatever, and they're afraid of making a fool of themselves or making you
Hmm.
cry because that's the worst thing in the world. And it's like, no, it's not the worst thing in the world. That's already happened. Now let's move
Right.
from here.
Yeah. A few years back, I took up the position of it's all about education, really. I mean, if we don't know how to act or we're fearful and we're avoiding a situation, it's
Yes,
because we don't have all the information that we need. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. And so,
correct.
I thought, well, people avoid me. People avoid, other people that have had a similar loss because they don't know what to do, like all the things you just said. So let's teach them. Let's teach them. Here's what you
Yeah,
say. Here's what you don't say. Please don't say, they're in a better place and that stuff. But it's all about education because then that eliminates the fear eliminates the stigma, and it just kind of all goes together.
it does.
Unfortunately, I'm only one person, so I have I have a pretty big soapbox, but sometimes it gets lonely up there on my
It
box.
does. It for real does. I was
Yeah.
on a podcast yesterday talking with Tony, and
Hmm.
like when we lost our daughter in 16, there was nothing. Like they had these writing things, and I'm like, meh, no, I didn't want to see a counselor because it's just not how I was brought up.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, how am I going to help myself then? Like, what am I going to do
Hmm.
to move through this grief that I have? Because
Right.
especially for a blended family, it's not there.
Yeah.
It's just not there. Because it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's not your biological child. Why do you care? Because it's still my
Because I
child.
love them. Yeah.
Correct. It's like, hello,
Still connected to that person.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Crazy.
it is crazy. How is your son handling all of this?
So my son went on I want to say 13-year period of self-medication and drug use, and that
Yeah,
was his way of, escaping the loss of his sister. And, because it wasn't my sibling, I can't quite understand. I mean, I tried, but I can't really understand that
correct.
connection, right? That it being his sibling. Um, so, he self-medicated for a long time. Almost lost him to suicide once because he'd kind of, reached the point where he
Right.
didn't want to be here either.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and fortunately, he came and he lived with my husband and I for a year. Um, Turned himself around, got clean, right? Because you think better or more rationally usually when you're clean.
Yeah,
So getting him clean was good. And then he, I mean, he smokes pot. I'll be honest, he smokes pot. I figure if he smoked pot you know, as different from all the other hardcore drugs he was doing,
right.
I'll take that and we'll get to he moves beyond that.
100%.
Um, but he and I have never really had a really great relationship. Even before she died, there's a lot of personality clashes there with him.
Hmm.
So I'll be honest, we haven't talked really for the last year, because he has no need to talk to me. So I struggle with that as a mom too, because that's
Yeah,
like you lose one kid, he's still alive, but it's kind of like losing
you lost him
your
again.
child if
Lost
they
another
don't
one.
want to talk to you. Yeah. So I give it to God and I pray and I say, well, I know you're working on him. So when you're done working on him, give him back, please.
Right,
And we'll go from there and see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, he and being siblings, they'd go off and do things together that, you don't tell your parents that you've done
right.
because it's bad
Yeah,
behavior. So I learned, new things after she died when he was kind of at a point where he wanted to share, and get some stuff off his chest. I was hearing about parties and, things that may have happened to her at these parties that, sparked, her eventually taking her own.
mm,
So, but again, I couldn't control what I didn't know. And, they knew, the bad behavior they weren't supposed to do. If they chose to do it, what can I do? And that's not, for your listeners, that's not an excuse at all. But
no,
the reality is, I mean, if they don't tell you and you don't see it, we're not psychic to know what our kids are
right,
doing 24/7.
right. I suppose he carries a bunch of that guilt with him as well.
He does, because they had kind of a rocky relationship too. Um, there were certain points where he was, I want to live with my dad and I don't want Chelsie to come over. And um, he spent years, he was calling her fat. And so, he kind of messed with her
Mm,
self-esteem, you know. just
Mhm.
petty, kid stuff, but still, I
Right.
mean, it affected her. So, yeah, so when she was gone, yeah, he was holding a lot of
Yeah.
guilt and, I wish I would have been a better brother and I wish I wouldn't have said these things
Right.
that upset her.
Mm.
So he
Man.
needs therapy, but he refuses to go to therapy and he's, in his early 30s now and he's like, I don't have to.
Well, at some
You're
point it'll
right, you're an
catch up
adult.
to him, and you're right. At
It'll
this
catch up
point, he
to him.
doesn't,
Yeah,
but at some point he might have to,
he might have to.
or he
Yeah,
might choose
and
to.
we'll hope he
Hopefully,
does. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
I know our kids after Cassandra passed, there was a couple of them that went down that road, um,
Mm,
and chose to self-medicate. They distanced themselves from the family, and it's they're back. I mean, they turn themselves around and everything, and so thankfully they're not on that path anymore.
mhm.
Um, and I didn't even know
Yeah.
they were on that path because I was so in my own trying to figure my own shit out and not
Sure.
drown.
Right.
And
Well, I
I
mean,
didn't
and
even see it.
not to pry into your stuff, but I can
Yeah,
say that for myself, I'd love to know if you can concur with this. Right after she passed away, I was totally non-functional, couldn't get out of bed, couldn't understand what the heck just happened. I was functional enough to do what I was responsible to do, so I had to get up and go to work. I don't think I was that effective at work, but
right,
I went and I came home and I was eating and that kind of stuff. But I was to the point that I found I couldn't parent. And, if you tell any sane person that hasn't lost a child, I just couldn't parent. And they look at you like,
yeah,
that's stupid. But it was true.
right,
And so when my son was, spiraling and self-medicating, and I did not have the emotional and mental capacity
right.
to
Handle
charge
that
at
as
him
well.
110% to pull him, or try to pull him out of it.
Right,
And, I mean, I've had my friends, I've had family, I've had other parents say, well, why weren't you supporting your son? I'm like,
right.
you're lucky I got out of bed and
I don't
I
think
had to pay
people
the
talk about
bills.
that stage enough because, like, when I mention it all the time on a lot of my podcasts, I mention it like the state of nothingness that you go into when you lose your child. Like, at least for me, and I know talking to other mothers, like they've been there too. They didn't know what that stage was called or whatever, but I call it the nothingness. Because nothing matters. You want to go out? Great. You want to do a line of coke? Great. You want to go drive a car naked? Great. It doesn't matter. I don't care.
Yeah,
Whatever. Do
yeah,
whatever
call me
you need to
later.
do
Yeah.
because right here, I'm not functioning. I have literally shut down because my one goal that I was responsible for in life when I had you is gone.
Right.
I failed.
Mhm.
That is exactly what goes through. That's what went through my mind. I was taxed with helping keep this child alive to adulthood, to see her prosper, to all these things, and I failed. And that's the only thing that's running through my mind at that moment. If I just remove myself, maybe the other children will not fail.
Right. Yeah.
And these are the things, these are the emotions and the thoughts that like run through your mind, I think that
Mhm.
nobody talks about.
Right. So we all think
Because
we're abnormal because we're not talking to each other to find out, hey, you're thinking that too.
But also, we don't realize what we're in. We have no
Mhm.
idea that we're in the state of mind, the state of shock, the state of nothingness that we found ourselves in. And hell, who knows how long we're in that stage? I don't know. I have no idea. It's a blur for me. It is an absolute blur. I just remember getting the news and then a period of time lapsed and I went back to work. That's all I remember at that moment in time. I
I
could have
had a
been,
week.
you know,
I had a week. I had a week of bereavement leave, and she passed away on a Friday night. And so I had that weekend, and then my
mm,
bereavement leave kicked in. that next weekend. Well, the next weekend, by the time we got all
Oh
the
my gosh. Only 1 week?
particulars together, only 1 week. Again, single mom and had to pay the bills. So
Yeah,
once I
yeah, I
got through
get
my
that.
bereavement
Oh,
leave, I had to be back. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I talk to people about trying to change bereavement leave policy because,
yeah.
a week's not enough time.
No,
A
no.
week might be enough time if you have some extended family and you have to fly out of town and, go to a funeral and pay your
Well, a week
respects and
is
go back
enough time
home.
to maybe plan the funeral and everything.
Yeah. So
Just
we
to
had the
plan it.
funeral that
That's
second
it.
weekend. Yeah.
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 But then to process it that first, yeah, I don't know. It's insane.
Well, and
It's
like you said,
insane.
you're grasping. I mean, I found for myself, I was grasping for what's going to make me feel better.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I didn't have a personality that, would lead me to like drug or alcohol,
Right.
but I knew I got to talk to somebody about, I don't know who that is. Common sense, kind of led me to a support group that
Right.
only met once a month for like 90 minutes, which was great for those 90 minutes, not so great for the whole rest of the month. I'm awake and trying to function. But I liked what you said earlier that, you wanted to try this, but you knew that wasn't going to work and for your personality, right? And
Correct.
so, um, I'd started a company called Journey Through Grief. And, that's one of the things that we push is everybody's different. Everybody's grief is different. Everybody heals differently. So,
Yeah.
you might like to read. Yeah, I don't, you might like to read and you want to read all up on the whys and hows and who's, and somebody else might be like, I don't want to read anything. Just give me a video.
Right.
I mean, tell me what movie's on. Oh, I don't like movies. Let's talk about, is there a good podcast, that you can recommend? I don't, I want to go to a grief support group. Oh, you couldn't catch me at a grief support group. So
Right.
it's not just about, we lose somebody, uh, to suicide, particularly, and we give them a list of, oh, here's your resources. Good luck.
Hmm.
Well, we need to have enough resources with a variety of different types of platforms. So somebody can say, oh, da, 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 oh, I like that because that's a podcast. And hopefully that's, a good uh, mechanism for them to at least start the process,
Right.
working through it. But, it's just it's so vast. It's just really intricate, different for everybody. And yeah,
I agree
sorry, I
with that.
tend to ramble, but
No, it's
it is.
okay because I think that with the grief, it makes it so difficult because there's so many variables. There's so many like how they passed away, how old they were, versus how you learn and how you listen, like you said, like if you like to read or you like to listen or you like to watch, all of
Right.
those play a part. If it's a
Mhm.
male or if it's a female, and just because say you're talking on the subject doesn't mean they're going to resonate with you. They might resonate with, someone else down the road that, still female, still talking
Mhm.
about it, whatever.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't I just find it so weird. I come from the entrepreneurial space and it's like define your target market. It's like, okay, well I have that. But and maybe this is where my roadblocks and stuff come in, for my business and all of that stuff, or even just to helping people. I've lately gotten down to the point where I'm just going to do a live in my group every day, and I'm going to talk about topics that are on my mind, at that moment in time. And if they resonate, people will let me know, and if they don't, I'll know too. They
Sure.
won't
Yeah.
they won't comment or anything on it.
Yeah.
And so it's really finding not only where I fit in within the community, within my community, but where I fit in like on my own grief journey within my community.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I
Right.
know I've talked to this with Tony before too. It's like being a grief support person. Like, man, this road is long, it's hard, and it's like trying to
It
pardon my
is,
language.
we don't like to scare people, we don't like to scare the new
No.
people who think that, oh, a couple of years I'll be good. Yeah, no, this is a life transition that is going to affect you until you're no longer here.
Yep.
Let's be honest. And it isn't, it isn't like the gut wrenching
The
deep,
initial. Right.
like the initial. Yeah. I mean, over time it softens, it changes, but then you've changed too. So how you adapt
Correct.
to it, you know, it just changes you. Over here we call it the new normal because you're not the same person that you were, when your person passed on. You're just not physically, emotionally,
I don't know how
you're
you
not.
could be.
No,
If
no.
you
And I think,
are, then you're absolutely not dealing with anything.
right, right. I mean, if you see someone who has lost a child in that, and they're only like 1 or 2 years out, they're fine. They're just woohoo, right? Know that they're, probably in denial and they're not working through it because,
Right. Or they
we
didn't have
wouldn't
a good
expect them to.
connection with their child either.
Sure.
Something. There's something
Yeah.
going on, but man,
Yeah.
I know for us, it rocked our world for many, many years and still
Yeah.
sometimes. So, like, we
Yeah.
have her birthday coming up and we're doing a big party for it and inviting the community in because she was a big part of the community here before she
Mhm.
passed.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna go out into the community and invite them in, and grieve with them. And so
Mhm.
as a way
Yeah.
to help them process their grief as well.
Well, I used
Um,
to do, the first couple years when we had, her birthday.
mhm.
I just kind of shriveled up in my corner with my blanket and cried and did all of that. And I think it was about year 3 or 4. I was like, and I think I'd heard somebody say this. I can't recall for sure, but it was, they're even though they're not physically here, it's still their birthday.
Yeah.
So why not, celebrate their birthday? And so every year, I go out and I get a birthday cake on her birthday. And, over time, I've had people like look at me like, why? Why are you getting a birthday cake? Well, it's her birthday.
It's still the birthday,
Sometimes I've been the only one eating cake, right? Which more for me. Okay.
right?
But yeah, I'm like, and I was sitting in a support group and I had a set of new parents, new loss for these
Mm.
parents, to suicide. And there's a big communication within this demographic that if you've lost a child to suicide and somebody comes up to you and says, how many children do you have? It will like stop you in your tracks going, how do I answer this? Because, you know, if I say, well, one's passed away, then they're going to want all the
Know
question.
all the details.
Why? All the details. Yeah. If I say, if I don't include that child in the number, but what if they find out that I lied? And so there's all this really intricate
Same here. Same
stuff
here.
in the headspace, right? And so I heard a really great thing one time, and maybe this will help you. But somebody said, well, I don't know what to say if somebody asks me how many kids I have. Because
Mm.
I'll, first couple years I lied, oh, I've got one, right? But somebody said, well, you've had parents, right? Well, yeah. Did you have grandparents? Well, yeah. Are your grandparents still alive? Well, no. Do you tell people you didn't have any grandparents? No. Oh, well,
Yep.
are your parents still alive? Well, no. Do you tell people you didn't have any parents? Well, no, they're just not here. Okay.
Right.
Neither's your child, and that's okay. And, I've had, I told that story to, like I said, these new lost
Mhm.
surviving parents. And the dad had like this epiphany of, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah.
Because you're right. I did have this child. They're just not
And
here.
just because they're
And I
gone
don't love
doesn't
them
make
any
it any
less
less.
than I did.
Right.
Right. Right now, do I, my mother who's deceased, do I have birthday cake on her birthday? No. But having
Yeah.
birthday cake for my daughter just,
Feels right.
includes her, right? Feels right. Includes her and it's okay. How I grieve is, how I grieve. And I don't need approval for that. And I think
No,
sometimes we look for approval. We look to
we
other
do.
people for approval. Am I grieving right? Am I doing, who cares? I think when you go through this type of loss, you hit that threshold of who cares? You don't approve of what I'm doing. Oh, well,
Go find
big
someone
deal.
else. I
Go
don't
find
care.
somebody else to, criticize.
I think that is a huge, huge thing because society tells us how we're supposed to grieve. Society has everything written out for us.
Mhm.
Um, and it has been brainwashed into our heads since birth. Um, and I don't know, I find it ridiculous because it's
Mhm.
like, if I choose to laugh, doesn't mean I don't love my daughter. If I choose to cry, doesn't mean I'm absolutely having a bad day. It just means I cried that day or I laughed that day. That's all that it means. Um,
Right.
but when people start assigning you like different things, like, oh my God, she's laughing. She
Mhm.
doesn't miss her child. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say, shut the hell up, go look in the mirror and fix your own shit. Leave me
Right.
alone.
Right.
And, you
You're not
know,
helping me at all. Yeah. You're not
no,
you're
if
not
this
helping.
is the basis of all the things that you have to do in the day is to critique me, you seriously need to find another hobby.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So,
So, I found, like I said, that one support group
mhm,
and I loved them. They were great. So they were the Compassionate Friends. So that's a group that supports people who've lost a child. Um, and the facilitator was awesome. And I was the only person there of about 10, I want to say, that had lost a child to suicide. Everything else
mhm.
was illness, accident. But they welcomed me and it was great.
Yeah.
So about 6 months after she died, when I was going to work every day, I had to pass the cemetery. And so passing the cemetery every day, PTSD, right?
Yes.
So every day I had to go back and forth. And I said, I can't do this. And we lived in Western Washington. It was kind of a rainy, kind of gray community. Wasn't doing any good for my mental health. Right.
No.
So I said, I got to get out of here. And so we ended up moving down to Las Vegas for 5 years, where there's sun. It's sun all the time. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go find one of these compassionate friend groups down here and, you know, dial myself in. And I found one and I went, and there was probably 20, 25 people there. And we all go around and we introduce ourselves. And I said, here's who I am. Lost my daughter to suicide, crickets. And all the rest of these parents, because I was again the only one, all the rest of these parents just kind of alienated me for the
Yep.
whole rest of the 90 minutes. It was horrifying. And I was like, oh, I'm not coming back. And probably the only thing that saved me at that point was there was a support group in town that was specifically for suicide loss. And it
Mhm.
was run by a lady who had lost her son to suicide 17 years earlier. And she actually started the suicide prevention state office of Nevada
Oh, nice. Okay.
back in the day. She was running the support group, and I could go in and I could talk to all these other survivors of suicide loss. And it was like loss of spouses. We had, some loss of children too, but just all the nuances that
Mhm.
come with a suicide loss. We could commiserate with each other and go, oh, hey, I put my keys in the freezer. Yeah, so did I. And because, the brain fog and all of that.
Put the
So,
milk in the cabinet. Oh,
right. And
geez.
then you can't find it later.
Right.
Um,
And it's
and so that,
bad.
right. Darn it. Now I gotta go buy milk. Now I gotta
Right.
remember to go buy milk. Yeah.
Right.
And so that was like, probably what saved my life. But at that point, as I'm listening to these other stories, I'm also getting, our directions, our list of criteria when we came of you won't talk about this outside of this room. If you run into one of the other people in this room at a grocery store or whatever, unless they acknowledge you first, you don't know them. And I thought, that's dumb. That's what? How are we
This
supposed
sounds
to
like
heal
that
if we
Brad Pitt
can't?
movie.
It was like if you were going to an AA meeting
Yeah, it
almost
sounds
of,
like that
I'm not
Brad
going to
Pitt
let them
movie. You
know that
know,
I'm
the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club.
right, right. And I'm like, how are we going to heal? How are we going to,
Right.
that's dumb. And so the more this went on, and I realized that there was the stigma of we don't talk about suicide at all.
Right.
Then that fueled my passion of, oh, I got to do something about this because this doesn't even compute for me on a normal level,
Right.
of of fixing this, because I'm a fixer, a type A personality, the whole thing.
Yes.
But over time, a couple years later, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to figure out why I had therapists when Chelsie was alive that didn't fix the problem. And, maybe I'll just learn something about mental health in the process. So I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree in
Okay.
psychology. And I had done accounting for, 30 years, well, 20 years at that point. And my husband said, well, if you're going to go spend all this money, get a bachelor's degree, get it in something that you want to do, not in, something that might be common sense. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to get it in accounting. I'm going to get it in psychology. And so I did. And through all the classes, all the mental health, psychology, all of it, nobody talked about suicide.
No.
I had one professor talk about suicide, and
Wow.
he was my sociology teacher that was talking about suicide in communities in
Wow.
Ethiopia or something. Like, huh, okay. But, I just kind of brushed it off, let it go. And so over time, I got my degree over time. Then I was like, well, I need to like start something, to get out here and talk about suicide. And, so like I said, I started Journey Through Grief. And then after 5 years in Las Vegas, we couldn't take it anymore because there's like no trees, no water, no, no. So I said, we're going back up to Washington. But I said, I'm not going to be able to handle being back on the west side of the state where it's cold and drizzle. I can't do it. So we moved to the east side of the state over into Spokane and lived there. That was in 2012, and we lived there up until last year. But I was still, kind of fueled by this whole thing of years keep going by, and I'm hearing the same stories from people.
Right.
Nobody understands me. My family walks away from me. My boss doesn't understand why I'm not, working at 100% capacity while I'm there. Nobody understands why I'm, you know, set off by buying school clothes, for the new
Mhm.
school year. Just all these nuances you don't think of. And I thought, I got to do more. So I quit my full-time job in 2019 and I started Journey Through Grief as an official business full time. And I decided to start it as a business rather than a nonprofit because A, nonprofits are a pain. B, because they're all fighting for the same grant money. And if you don't get your grant money, you can't do anything. So I thought, no, I'm going to run it as a business. I'm going to, change the landscape a little bit. Then I took a whole lot of criticism from, oh, you're running it as a business. You're just trying to scam people out of money.
Right. I figured
So
that'd be the first comments.
oh yeah, I still battle that. I battle that to this day. And I get really upset and I tell people what I think.
Right.
But about a year into that, well, then COVID hit, so that kind of derailed me a little bit. I decided I was going to go back to school for my master's. So I
Hmm.
went back to school, got my master's in psychology, and again, no discussion at all about
Hmm.
suicide in the mental health field
Interesting.
or in these classes. And so I started, thinking. I thought, okay, so when, if I wanted to graduate and become a counselor or a social worker or whatever,
Mhm.
I would have to come out and sit under a already licensed person for like 3 to 4 thousand hours, depending on where, you live
Right.
at. So you can learn the ropes. Okay, so if I have a therapist who went through college and didn't learn about suicide loss or suicide grief, and then I'm supposed to help the next person do their, get their 3,000 hours. How is that person learning about it if the first person? So I was like,
Right.
oh my goodness, we have really kind of like an epidemic going on here because people don't realize, when they're going to go see a therapist, that therapist may not have training in the thing you're going to therapy for.
True
And
that.
it's common, for anybody to say, "Oh, you're struggling, please, go to therapy." And
Yes.
don't get me wrong, I love therapy. I've been to therapy. I don't have an issue with therapy. But there's a lot of people that do because they had really bad experiences going to therapy. There you go. Going to therapy, and they they didn't get helped, and then, we wonder later on what happened. And so now my new passion for this year is to get in front of a whole bunch of therapists and say, "Hey, let me tell you about suicide and suicide grief and see where that goes."
Good for
I
you.
uh I presented I was on the board of the American Association of Suicidology for a year. And so last year I presented at their conference, and I had a room of about 70 people, and just, for the heck of it, I mean, the aftercare side of suicide prevention is postvention. And so if you're working in the field, common sense, you would know, I would think you would know what that word is. And so I had this room of like
What
70
word? Hold on.
postvention. Postvention. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Because
But
we
I'm
don't
not in the
talk
field
about it.
either. I'm not in
We
that
don't talk
field.
about it. We don't talk
No.
about it. And so I'm in this room of clinicians and therapists and educators. And I said, "Hey, who in here who's ever heard of the word postvention and knows what it means?" And I had about 10 people raise their hands. And of course, I told them then, what it meant. But I thought, that's interesting. Well, then I had two more presentations last year, totally different audiences. It's just out of curiosity, who knows what postvention means? And I have about 10% of the room. No. I'm like, okay, that's one of our problems is, again, education to everybody so that my goal is, 10, 20 years from now, if I said to you, "Hey, let's talk about postvention," you'd be like, "Okay," and we'd know what we were talking about and just carry on just like anything else. But until we talk about it again, so we're educated, talking about it, it's never going to be mainstream. And we need to get suicide loss into the mainstream, just like we lose somebody to cancer, we lose somebody to car accident, we lose somebody to, if you tell me, you know, I lost my daughter to car accident, I know what that is, right?
Right.
But, people don't know about suicide. And I had this epiphany the other day because I was talking to one of my colleagues and I said, it's interesting. We, we're really big on talking about mental health now. We see it like on Facebook and our LinkedIn
Right.
feeds and all of that, which is awesome. But, we say, okay, let's talk about it. We need to talk about it more. We need to learn about it. But then somebody dies.
It's like, zoop.
And it's like, well, we can't talk about it because we'll cause contagion.
Right.
Or we say, just ask somebody, are they suicidal? Are they thinking about suicide? Because, we know by research that that doesn't cause somebody to just go off, die by
Right.
suicide. So, we've got the dialogue going. Let's talk about suicide and, are you thinking about suicide? Yet somebody dies. Well, now there's contagion. So we better not talk. Well, it's plain not true. It's just not. Yeah.
I don't
I'm
know.
not saying
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people, because again, we're all different, right? You're
Hmm.
gonna have those few that might say, I was thinking about suicide yesterday, and somebody, today it just sounds like a good idea. And they go do that. And we hope we can save them in time, right? But as a general mass population, I do not believe, yeah, like the schools, right? They don't want to talk about it in schools because of contagion. Well, like when Chelsie died, again, Friday night, kids weren't even back to school till Monday. By Saturday morning, they all
They all
knew.
knew. They
Friends knew.
all
They all
knew.
knew. They all know it happens. So don't, treat them like they're stupid and don't know. And,
I don't
we're
know if
not
they
going to talk.
treat them like they're stupid and they don't know. I think it's probably got more along the lines that they're not educated in it and they have no idea how to handle it.
Right,
That's the
right.
big problem. Like even with grief, they don't talk
Mhm.
about it at the school systems. They don't talk about it. We're just, oh, and I've fallen victim to this myself. I don't want to bring my child to a funeral because it's going to make them sad. I don't want to bring them there because I don't want them to see this side of the world. So that means I'm painting a picture of everything is rosy and sunshiny and death doesn't happen, which is absolutely not the case.
Right,
And,
right.
and I'm guilty of it
Yeah,
just as, as a lot of other people are. I was like, that seems like it's too much for my kid to handle.
yeah,
Maybe I should
yeah.
be dragging all their butts to the funerals, and understanding how people react after, going through
Right,
this in
right.
grief, like
Sure.
how it tears families apart, how it destroys them, but also how it brings them together too. Like
Yeah.
it brought,
Well,
it
what's
brought our
interesting,
family together. It didn't tear us
what's
apart,
right,
thankfully.
right. What's interesting is I pulled together a memorial service because, we were small town, right? So I pulled a memorial service at the end of that next week. And I let the school know in case, her friends wanted to come. And I'm seeing these teenage girls kind of in little clusters, two or three hanging out, no parents. So I
Mm,
said to somebody, I'm like, because they're crying, they're distraught,
yeah,
right? They probably need some support, parental
right.
support. And where are their parents? Well, their parents just dropped them at the door and they'll come back, in an hour or so and pick them up. And I was horrified. So it's like, okay, I wouldn't have done that.
No,
Interestingly, though, a few years ago, somebody was saying that you need to let your child grieve, their friends. You need to let them grieve
absolutely.
how they need to grieve without hovering over them all day. So maybe that's where these parents were coming from, to just drop.
And that
I
could
don't know.
be,
But
I
I
could
was
see
I was
that.
horrified. I was horrified. And they'd interviewed some kids who said, in this study, I guess, that, like I don't need my mom there. I need to just go in and be with my friends and honor my
You
friend.
know, I think that that would make sense for teenagers, because obviously, unless you have a very good relationship with your parents, kids
Mhm.
generally act a different way when they're not with their parents, and they
Right,
might not grieve as properly as they would, need to with their parents there. So I could see that. I could absolutely
right.
see that.
But I
But
was just
still,
like,
I would have
what?
not done that. I'd have been like, "Girl, we pulling up. Let's go. I'll
Yeah,
be with
yeah.
you."
I'll sit in the back if you don't want to,
You don't want to
see
be near
me.
me, that's
But
fine.
yeah,
Yeah, you go
right.
hang with your peeps and I will sit in the back because I need to know how to support you through this.
Yeah,
I might not have known her, but she was a good friend of yours. Therefore, by proxy, I care.
right, right. But, just all the little idiosyncrasy dynamics. I mean, we'd had a viewing
Hmm.
um, earlier in the day, and a bunch of her friends came to that. And then at the time when we did this memorial service, I said, "Well, I want the casket closed. I don't need to traumatize a whole bunch of teenagers by having this casket open." Um, and so they closed it. Well, back to my son. As soon as he'd heard about this, he ran off and was self-medicating for 2 or 3 days. So he could have come to the viewing. He chose not to, and he showed up in the middle of this memorial service
Mm,
and sober, but not pleasant. And so he comes in the middle of this and he says, "I want the casket open. I want to see her," because he hadn't seen her yet, because he wasn't there when she died. He'd been absent all week. He didn't go to the, so this is going to be the first time he's going to see her. And
mm.
I said,
That is not a good way to see
"No,
her for the first time.
no,
No.
no." And I said, "No, I'm not gonna, well, I'm gonna tell the people they need to open her casket. I want to see her." And I said, "No, you're not." I said,
Yeah.
I have 300
Not
people here.
just you.
300 people. I figured we'd maybe get 100 people. 300 people. Her kindergarten teacher, or not teacher, her kindergarten principal was there.
Mhm.
And just all these people came out of the woodwork that had known her ever. And I said, I'm not going to traumatize all these people in this church because you want to see her. I said, you can wait until everybody goes. And then I'll have them open it and you can sit here as long as you need to. I don't care, but not. And so I still had to wait for these poor this group of girls from their parents to show up and pick them up and take them out of there before I could have the casket.
Oh my
So I
gosh.
mean, it's just all these little, just weird nuances, you know. But interestingly, I got a card, I think it was from my supervisor, who said, be prepared because you've got all of this, you know, hoopla going on right now. But a month from now, 2 months from now, everybody's going to go back and,
Nothing.
you know, go back to their lives and their daily routines, and they're not going to check on you. So
Mm-hmm.
just know, you know, that I'm thinking of you and you know,
That is
that.
beautiful.
But and it was true.
A
It was true.
100% true. We still have family because we had when Cassandra passed, like I have a huge family. My husband has a huge family. Her mother has a huge family, and her stepfather has a huge family. Plus, she was at Daughters of the American Legion because my husband was in the military, and so she was a participant in this American Legion in the hometown. And so we had, gosh, 500-600 people show up. It was insane the amount of people that showed
Yeah.
up just for like because we didn't do a viewing. We couldn't do a viewing. There was
Mhm.
nothing. Uh,
Right.
Nothing we could do to be able to do a viewing. Gosh, why can't I think of the name? The people that did the service for us, they
The mortuary.
guided us. Yes. They
Yeah.
guided us to not have an open casket because there was no way that they could make her look remotely good. Like, okay, I don't want that to be the last thing that they see,
Right.
or and
Or
remember her.
you. Yeah.
I don't look at caskets. I refuse to. And people are like, why? Why don't you look at them in casket? I said, because that's not how I want to remember them. That is not the last vision that I want. Even when I lost my granddaughter in 2022, we had a service to be able to go see her. I couldn't go in the room with her. I'm like, I don't want that my last vision. I want to
Mhm.
envision them, happy and running and laughing and playing and not lying like that. I can't do it.
Right. Right.
And so it was 4 hours of us standing there and people just coming through, and they had to eventually just shut the doors and shut the people out. It's like we
Hmm.
couldn't. We had
Yeah.
we hadn't moved from the front of the room at all. And then on the service, I think it was the next day. I don't even remember. I have to look at my notes because I wrote notes when I was
Hmm.
actually coming out of it. Um, I wrote notes down on everything that had happened. And that's when I remember, the people and all the stuff. But at the funeral service itself, it all the pews were full and it became a standing only in the back. And then it
Hmm.
was another hour before we got out because everyone wanted to stop again. And I mean, like, this
Yeah.
is the power that she had at 19 years old with the
Yeah.
family members in the community just coming to support us and shower us. I mean,
Yeah.
that was beautiful. Sucked, for the reason why, but it was beautiful that they took time out to come, show their support for our family in that
Well,
time.
it's nice when you realize that, you know, your child, you know, held that much,
Yeah.
you know, had that much love. And sometimes, you know, they don't even know it, but
No, they don't know
say
it.
that out.
I don't think any person really understands the capacity that they have for, affecting the people around them.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so that was extremely beautiful. And it was, humbling to see that a 19-year-old, you know,
Hmm.
because to me, it's, I tell people all the time, when society tells us, because society tells us that we're not supposed to bury our children. Society tells us this. But in
Hmm.
reality, there's no guarantee ever of that.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
Clearly, we both know this.
Clearly, yeah.
And And so I tell people all the time, like now that they're saying this, and now that every time I think that, because I think I should never have to bury my child, I think that all the time. And then I have to counter it with, you know, old age is a privilege, not a right. You
Right.
know, we don't all make it to the ripe old age of 100,
Yeah.
most of us
Well,
don't.
the best conversation I had was with my insurance agent when she was like 4, and he had just become a new insurance agent for State Farm. And so he was trying to meet this quota, of selling his first
Mhm.
number of insurance policies. And I had just left my ex-husband, and my mother had just passed away like 6 months before that, maybe. And of course, I saw what it costs, to have a funeral for my mother. And so I'm in my State Farm agent's office, and he wants to sell me a life insurance policy. Well, if something happens to you, people need to be able to take care of your kids. You should have the money for that. I'm like, well, that makes sense. And then he said, and then why don't you get a couple whole life policies on the kids?
Yeah.
And I said, she's 4, my son's 5. Why? And he said, well, you know what you just paid, and again, you're not guaranteed that, they're going to live to old age. So, if you can get your checkbook out, at the time when we had checkbooks, right? If you can get your
Right.
checkbook out and write a check for a funeral, um, then okay, can you do that? No, single mom, how am I going to get groceries? I'm like, no, I can't just write a check for another funeral for one of my kids, even though it's never going to happen, right? Okay,
Right.
so now here we are 12 years later, and I had to cash in that policy. And he
Yeah.
was still my insurance agent. Of course, he came to the memorial and he was devastated. And, he's crying while he's getting the check
Yeah.
together and everything. But I mean, I tell insurance agents all the time, I'm like, use me, have people talk to me, because that was like, in your audience, get a life insurance policy on your
Yeah.
kid. I don't care how old they are.
Same with
You
us.
know, whole
My
life
father,
plans are good because they can pull that money out and take it with them. But,
right.
you know, get a policy. They're like $4 a month, $5 a month, I think I was
They
paying.
were ridiculously inexpensive. Like when we got my father had passed away in 2005 from pancreatic cancer, and I was devastated, devastated. That was the
Mhm.
first like major loss that I had sustained in my life was my father, and just
Mhm.
devastated me. And he was my boyfriend at the time, but now husband. We came back home, and it was probably a couple months, and we had insurance policy on both him and me, and all, because we have a blended family, so all 5 of the children. And we
Yep.
had that, I mean, up until they like graduated off the plan.
Mhm.
I think they're 26, they take them off, and then they get their own plan, whatever.
Right. Right.
Um, and
Well, I
so
mean,
we
let's
had
talk
that.
reality. It's not cheap. And
No,
so between the funeral and the casket and and the actual
six to
plot of
ten
the
thousand
ground,
dollars
oh,
or
and
more.
flowers.
Yeah,
I paid $5,000 just in flowers. Um, I think all in all it was about 16 grand.
yeah.
And, it was a little policy. It was like 20 grand. So it's like
Yeah.
had a whole bunch. Because,
You're not
in
to get rich. It's
retrospect,
not to get rich off your children. It's just to make sure you
no,
pay to pay
no, but
the,
I have to say though, in retrospect, I would have gotten a lot more, because had I had a lot more, I could have circumvented that week of bereavement leave
yes,
that I needed to go back to
that's
work and pay the
true.
bills. So when she's 4, and I'm not thinking anything's ever going to happen anyway, I'm not thinking of, I better have money when I, can't get out of bed for six
Yeah.
months or, whatever. So again, for your audience,
Oh,
get a
that's a
life
smart
insurance
move.
policy and maybe get double the amount at least of your funeral costs,
Right.
because, you know, you don't know. You don't know how you're going to be when that happens, and God forbid it
True.
doesn't.
That's some smart wisdom right there. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, when you're taking that time off, because I'm married, so it was my husband, and he went to back to work sooner than us. Well, we work for a small company as well, and they paid, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks of bereavement, whether we were there or whether we weren't, didn't matter. It was like, just, you
Yeah.
guys just do what you need to do.
Right.
You need more, let us know, but
Right.
this is to get you started. So we had a completely different experience with work and stuff after that. So Yeah, that makes perfect sense to plan for it, even though you don't want it to happen. Plan for it anyway,
Right.
because
Definitely.
shit happens, life happens, and here we are.
You don't know and you can't control what you think you can get to control. It's just out of your hands.
No. It's absolutely 100% out of your hands. I have had such an amazing chat with you today. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. And I know we're running past the hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time as well as everyone listening in. But is there anything you want to leave our audience with? Any thoughts, suggestions? Please make sure you let them know again, like your the business that you started to help people in grief. Please let them know that name as well.
Sure. You can go to Journey Through Grief, and that's THRU grief.com. On there, you can get links to my podcast, um, other resources. We offer life coaching for suicide loss survivors. So, if you want to talk about coaching and how that might be a better alternative than traditional therapy, let us know. And yeah, I would say one thing that I would leave everybody with is if you know somebody that has lost someone to suicide, don't ghost them. Don't, you know, they would rather you say, I don't know what to say to you. I want to help you, but I don't want to make you cry, or be honest, be straight
Yeah,
up front and say, this is why I'm avoiding you. This is why I'm scared to talk to you.
yeah,
Because a loss survivor would rather have you be honest and tell them that than to walk away and never talk to them again. You're not going to make their pain worse, because I guarantee you it's already the worst pain they've ever been through in their life, and they need you. So,
yeah.
somebody who's lost somebody to suicide, just walk up and say, hey, I'm thinking of you. Give them a side hug, whatever kind of relationship you have with that.
Right. Yeah.
But just don't shy away from them. And, if you don't know what to say, or you still think you don't know what to say, go on my website, send me an email, and we can have a conversation. That
Right. I love that. Thank you so much for that.
You're
And thank
welcome.
you, listeners, for listening in. And if you found this in any way helpful or could be helpful to someone else, please share it out. Hit the like buttons, all the things. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.